Why is it that some guys seem to get good at game effortlessly? Every single time you see them, they're massively better. They're at intermediate within months and they're advanced in less than a year. Whereas most guys in game are struggling with one sticking point for years at a time. They're constantly frustrated, they're quitting and starting again, and they'll probably never get to advanced. What's the difference between the guys that achieve mastery and the guys that wallow in mediocrity? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So the first step in mastering game is recognizing it for what it is, which is it's a skill set. Most of the world thinks this nebulous idea of charisma, something you're either born with, you either have it or you don't. The fact that you're here, the fact that you recognize that game is a skill and you're watching this video already means you're ahead of about 95% of the world. So congratulations. But the next step is equally as important and arguably more difficult, and that is mastering this skill that is game. The good news is the same process that you can use to master anything in life, you can also apply to game with a few little tweaks. So we're going to talk about that process, and then I'm going to show you how to apply it to game. Before we can master game, we first need to understand what mastery even looks like, what it is. And there are particular levels, particular aspects to mastering game, which are very similar to mastery in everything. There are fundamentals, then there are basics, there are intermediate skills, advanced skills, and then there is that little extra bit to take you to world class. And this is the same as in anything you would learn. If you were learning math, first you have to learn basic arithmetic. Then you have to learn the algorithms to take that basic arithmetic to more complex situations. Then you're going to learn exceptions like fractions and decimals. Then you're going to learn concepts to pull it together like algebra. Then you're going to learn more advanced concepts like calculus, trigonometry, geometry. Eventually you'll get into crazy stuff like differential equations, number theory, doing proofs. But you need to understand the fundamentals before you can do those more advanced things. If you can't do basic arithmetic, you're going to have a hell of a time doing calculus. It's the same thing in game. You need to know the fundamentals. One more quick example from another area to make the point. Let's say you wanted to master the game of soccer. Well, first you have to learn basic ball control. Then you have to learn how to do that basic ball control with enough awareness that you can see what else is going on. Then you need to learn passing and combinations. Then you need to learn strategy for where to be on the field. And then you need to learn more advanced tactics like how to throw your opponent off, how to be deceptive about what you're doing, etc. And actually, before any of this in soccer, you need to understand the rules of the game. You need to know something like you're trying to put the ball in the goal, you can't use your hands, what is offside, what is a throw-in, etc. So you have to start with the very, very most basic concepts all the way to very advanced applications. It's the same in game. So when it comes to mastering game, there are 5 levels of skill you need to achieve. The fundamentals, basics, intermediate, advanced, and world class. Let's start with the fundamentals. And what I consider fundamental may surprise you because this may be stuff you think of as complex, and if so, that's a problem. Because if you try and do other things without understanding these fundamentals, you're probably going to get those other things wrong. So what are the fundamentals in game? So some examples of the fundamentals in game would be things like understanding female psychology, knowing that even when a girl likes a guy, she probably can't make a move. Understanding evolutionary psychology and knowing what it is that a woman's looking for in a man, knowing that it has a lot more to do with what would have been attractive as cavemen than what exists in modern day society. Having an idea, if you meet a girl in a bar, what are the actual steps you want to take in order to establish a relationship so you're not just spinning your wheels and going in circles. Those are the fundamentals. If you don't have those, all the push-pulls and tactics and like clever lines in the world aren't going to get you anywhere because you're not going to use them to a defined purpose, and you're also not going to be able to judge whether or not they're working to achieve the outcome as desired. So with this said, what is the first step in getting good at game? Number 1 is getting yourself well-versed in these concepts. And guess what? This channel is a great source for that. I have a lot of videos that are theoretical, maybe too theoretical for some people, but they teach you these principles. Beyond that, at this stage, you should start trying to get some general reps. As soon as you have a model in your mind of how an interaction should go, you should go out and start having interactions and trying to make that model come into reality, even if you're not very good at it. As long as you know I'm here and the goal is here, trying to achieve that goal and struggling and sometimes failing is a critically important part of your learning process. Now, the things I'm saying to you right now may seem super basic, especially if you've been watching this channel for a while, but it is shocking how many guys are going out and doing game and they're completely unaware of this. They're thinking about, what's my opener and what's my pulling line. Meanwhile, they don't have any concept of what is value or what story they're trying to convey to the girl about themselves. Right? And so they have this smattering of lines, a smattering of techniques with no clear direction, no clear idea of what they're actually trying to achieve with any of them. Those guys are destined to stay in this loop of beginner intermediate for a very, very long time. Now, the next stage of mastery above the fundamentals, once you know what you are trying to achieve, once you have an idea of your outcome, is the basics. These are the absolute fundamental techniques. One other key fundamental of game is the idea that game has to be man to woman. The guy who goes out and does 1,000,000 reps and just has platonic conversation after platonic conversation after platonic conversation is also destined to never get good at game. Even the guy who has no technique but at least knows he wants to be man to woman and just goes and gives compliments to girls, at least he has a chance. The guy who's just having platonic conversations and never makes a move does not. That's the difference between a guy who has fundamentals with no other skills versus a guy who doesn't even have fundamentals. Once you've got the fundamentals down, now you're ready for the basics. And this is where you start getting into the fun, sexy stuff. This is where that like old school game tactics that are so much fun and get such great reactions, that's where that comes in. So the basics are things like teases, push-pulls, mini cold reads, negs, qualifiers, disqualifiers, DHV stories, comfort stories, pulling techniques. These are all basics. And so these are things that you can now add on top of your understanding of the fundamentals to make them better. So take, for example, the guy that I mentioned before who knows the fundamentals, he knows what he wants to do, but all he knows how to do is compliment girls. Well, with a girl that really, really, really likes him enough, he can maybe get a result just by complimenting and just being himself. But for most girls, putting them on a pedestal and kissing their ass is not going to do it. But if you switch out compliments for push-pulls, now all of a sudden, you're starting to have a really interesting game. You're starting to give compliments and have tension. And if you start to throw in some qualifying afterwards, so the girl feels like she won you over, now the girl's starting to go on an emotional journey. And now you know a couple pulling techniques, you can get her home. All of a sudden you put that together, now you have a real chance of succeeding on a more regular basis. Now you have a chance of actually having things work out for you. But there's a problem. And that problem is that a lot of people are aware of these things, but they can't actually execute them. Right? If you've watched a lot of my videos and haven't taken action yet and haven't practiced these techniques specifically, you probably can recognize a push-pull, but in the spur of the moment when a girl's right in front of you, you may not be able to come up with one. Or you may be able to watch my infield footage and see me pass a shit test and recognize it, but if a girl gave you a shit test, you might crumble. And so the level of having the basics is a great start, but there's a difference between knowing the basics and owning the basics. There's a difference between being aware of a push-pull and being able to come up with one on the spot. There's a difference between knowing that there is a pulling line and having it come to you in the spur of the moment and you delivering it correctly in a charismatic way that seems just nonchalant enough that it doesn't seem try-hard. And so the next level beyond the basics, being aware of these skills, is the intermediate level of owning the skills. Now, you're not mastering all of game right now. What you're doing is you're mastering the skills of game. So what I've just talked about here is that next level, which is the intermediate level. That's the level of becoming fluent with game, right? So you could think of the basics as knowing some words in a language. Intermediate is where you start to be able to put together sentences. And this intermediate level is actually a level where a lot of the old school game techniques, the stuff that we were doing in the early 2000s, becomes really, really useful. Here's an example of some of the things we used to do back then. Number one, I used to keep a notebook in my pocket of lines that I liked, of game lines for specific purposes. I would have a notebook full of negs. I would have a notebook full of push-pulls. I would have a notebook full of stories that I liked. And if I was ever stuck in a set, I could pull out my notebook, literally look at it, and then game on. Or afterwards, when I reached a sticking point, I could look at my notes and think to myself, what should I have done there? And I could go back and do it. And so number one, just accumulating more specific examples of each of these techniques that are congruent with you, that you've said and had them work before, and that they become much more of a habit for you is a next step. The other thing you can do, which is something that I train a lot on my mentorship program, I train it on my boot camps, is doing specific exercises for these techniques. For example, I'll do exercises with my boot camp students for looking at someone, saying the first thing that comes to mind and turning it into a push-pull, which, number one, teaches you how to do push-pulls on command. Number two, it's an opening format you can use almost universally. Or for example, I'll do exercises with my boot camp students where I'll give them a shit test and they have to pass the shit test on the spot. Now, it's a little easier when you're passing a shit test from me than when you're passing it from a girl. If you're fluid and fluent passing it from me to the point you almost don't have to think about it, when you do get one from a hot girl, it's going to be that much easier. The other thing you should start doing if you're at this intermediate level in order to develop fluency is when you go out and you talk to girls, focus on one particular skill while talking to them. So go out and talk to girls with an emphasis on, I'm going to do a lot of push-pulls. Or focus on talking to girls with an emphasis on, I'm going to really work on telling stories. That way you get to practice the technique in real time with real girls. And a little hint on this, a great way to do this is if you're ever talking to girls you're not as interested in, so the pressure's off and you're not worried about an outcome, that's a great opportunity to work on a skill. So let's say you're out with a wingman, your wingman's talking to the hot girl, you're talking to the girl you're not as interested in. That's awesome. That is an opportunity for you to practice your DHV stories. And that's an opportunity for you to practice qualifying and building comfort. That's a great situation in which to learn. So if you've gotten this far in your game, you've reached the intermediate level in learning game, and conveniently, you'll have reached roughly the intermediate level in your execution of game. If you can do the techniques of game with some fluency, and you have a general idea of the outcome you're looking for, i.e. you did the fundamentals and beginner steps before it, well, now you should be able to occasionally get a result. You're at a point where you now have a numbers game. You know how to attract a girl, at least when things go your way. And you know how to go ahead and get a girl home as long as there aren't too many obstacles. And you know how to pass shit tests as long as they're not too hard. So now you have a workable strategy. But from here, it's all about making it more consistent and getting it to a higher level. So that brings us to the advanced level in game. When you get to the advanced level in game, you're no longer doing skills in isolation. You're doing skills woven together into a fabric. You're doing skills in combination. So now you may start to have skills stacked on top of skills. You may do a push-pull that is designed to then get a reaction to a girl, which is designed to lead you into a qualifier. Or you may now be closing in multiple steps. You're challenging the girl. When she comes back from that challenge, it gives you an opportunity to qualify her, which leads into your close. Or you may be now mixing different forms of escalation. You may be doing a verbal qualifier with a physical push away. Another huge thing you're going to start adding at the advanced level. At the intermediate level, you probably got to the basics of how to manage a group. That's an intermediate level technique. At the advanced level, you're going to start owning the groups. You're going to start not only engaging everyone, but picking your target and leveraging the different other girls in the group to make your game with your target even better. Two other things that you're definitely going to start to see at an advanced level is you're going to start mixing baseline and plotline. And what that means is in game, you have two elements of communication. You have your baseline, which is the general conversation that's going on, and the plotline, which are the emotional spikes. Most guys at beginner and intermediate are having whatever conversation, and then they're mixing in a push-pull, a tease for the emotional spikes to push things forward. At an advanced level, your generic conversation is starting to also weave DHV stories into it. And it's starting to actually create tension by the frames that you're using. So you don't have to have as many overt emotional spikes in order for the set to move forward. You're actually moving it forward at all times, whether or not you're doing what could be considered an overt game move. The other thing you're absolutely starting to do at an advanced level is almost from the very beginning of the set, you are seeding the eventual pull. You are figuring out the logistics, you are screening the girl, you are thinking ahead to what are the scenarios where this girl might be coming home with me, is this going to be a phone number, and then you're tailoring your tactics and tailoring your game plan to that particular outcome. So if you know that it's just going to be a phone number and that's as far as it can go, you're actually going to tone down your physical escalation and tone up the amount the girl's chasing you in order to make that phone number solid. If you know you can take the girl home and she doesn't have any logistical impairments or any friends that are gonna be a problem for that, well then you can actually get more physical and ramp up the arousal levels in the set because that makes sense in that context. You're starting to think strategically and also in combination with how you use all of these different tactics that you already mastered at the intermediate level. In terms of your in-field training to maximize your growth at the advanced level, when you go out, you should mostly be trying to just do good game, but with a slight focus. However, now, instead of your focus being on a specific technique, I am going to do a lot of push-pulls, or I'm going to do a lot of takeaways, or something like that, because you've probably already mastered those skills. What I want you to focus on is more of the phases of game. So I want you to think, now I'm going to focus a lot on getting the girl to qualify very, very hard. Or I'm going to focus on having a ton of seeding the pull. or I'm going to focus on framing myself woven throughout the entire conversation as a high value guy. So now you are gaming to do your best with a specific focus, the same as you were at an intermediate level, but your specific focus is not on one-off techniques, it's on overall themes that you're adding into the conversation. So now, if you've reached this advanced level, number one, congratulate yourself. You're doing awesome. You should be able to meet girls very regularly. You should feel totally in control of your sex and dating life, and you should feel like you can meet girls whenever you want to. It may still feel to some extent like a numbers game, but it's certainly a numbers game where the odds are in your favor and you can certainly win. But tough situations may still be a problem for you, or unusual situations, and you may have trouble with getting the highest caliber girl or getting specific types of girls in specific situations. And that's where world-class type game adjustments come in. And what's another word for world-class? Well, mastery. When you are at the peak of your game, when things flow naturally, when you're able to solve new situations you haven't even seen before because you're understanding the principles and your ability to use techniques is so good and so fluid. So what are some other adjustments you'll make at this world-class level of game? Another one would be having relationships on your terms. And not just like you hook up with a girl and she wants to be monogamous and then you have a big fight over it or whatever. From the very beginning, setting the frame throughout what the relationship type is so that you smoothly transition into friends with benefits or multiple long-term relationships or a marriage if that's what you're going for. Another one would be adjusting to different venues. Knowing how to adjust your game to a loud dance floor versus a quiet lounge versus a coffee shop versus a social circle. Being able to seamlessly move from one venue to another and to be completely comfortable and completely effective in all of the different venues because you have such a deep understanding, not just of how to do game in one algorithmic way, but how to do game overall. Another huge thing that happens when you reach your world-class level at game is you start to develop your own style. Of all the guys I've known who are world-class at game, none of their games quite look the same, and that's because they all have different preferences. One guy might want to have tons of sex with tons of different women and want to get laid every night. Another guy might not care about having sex a lot, but he wants only really high quality women and only a certain type. He may play more of a long game and he may be more selective and focus more in social circle context or more in getting into high-end venues. Another guy may really like interactions with lots of banter, and so he'll create a game style that has a lot of shit tests and keep him engaged. Another guy might be very romantic, and he'll tailor his game to create those romantic interactions that really fulfill him. So at an advanced level, you're not just getting results, but you're getting results in a way that is fun, gratifying, rewarding for you, and is actually building chemistry between you and the girls as you're doing it. So it should be pretty obvious how this model can help you understand your overall trajectory in learning game. The path from absolute beginner to absolute master. But how would you use this on a day-to-day basis? Well, I would suggest two things. Number one, assess your general level. Like overall in game, what level are you at? Are you at the fundamentals level, the beginner level, intermediate, advanced, or world-class level? That's your general level. And then assess your sticking point. What is the thing you're struggling most at in game? That thing should be either at your current level or below your current level. And you want to focus on that thing until you get it to at least the level of the other areas of your game. So let's say that you've assessed your intermediate overall in terms of your results and most things, but you're really bad at passing shit tests. Well, in that case, I would focus on creating more banter in your sets, passing shit tests more until that comes up to the level of the rest of your game. And when that's happened, your overall game should have improved considerably in terms of your results. Beyond that, another key takeaway from all of this is assessing what is success and what is failure. So for me, when I was learning, and one of the reasons I think I got good at game quickly, is that it took me a long time to get from my first approach to the first time I had sex. But I had clear milestones in between so that it always felt like I was making progress and I was able to assess whether things were getting better or worse, right? Even when I went more than a year between my first approach and the first time I had sex, okay, I'm getting girls attracted to me more frequently, it's getting better. Okay, I'm getting dates a little more often, even though I can't close any of those dates yet, it's getting better. And so one way to assess is based on stats like that. Another way to assess, which is very critical though, is in what areas of your game are you getting to these different levels? If your results are relatively stagnant, but your flirting is feeling more fluid, it's coming more easily, it's getting better results, that is considerable measurable progress and you should be happy with it. because that is the internal step that is going to get you to that external reward. If you're too fixated on the external reward and are seeing that as failure or getting frustrated or stopping in your progress, that's only going to hold you back, right? As long as you are getting better incrementally and pushing forward in your levels at least one stage in game, you are improving, and you should take that as a positive. No matter what level you're at, these are not purely theoretical things. You need to be doing reps in field at every single level. Now, the reps in field will change and the focus of that infield time will change, but you do need to put in that infield time, right? The guy who puts in blind infield time with no analysis won't get good. The guy who puts in analysis with no infield time won't get good. You need the balance of the two. Hopefully, this model allows you to take your infield time and make it more effective. One final truth about mastery. It doesn't happen unless you really put in the time, unless you get a little bit obsessed. The idea of this model is to take that obsession and drive and desire to be really good at this and give it an outlet, to give it a focus. But if you just watch this video and you're like, oh, that's an interesting model, and then you continue going out one day a week and not giving a lot of thought in between, that's not going to get the job done, right? The idea is you do have to put in the time, you do have to be motivated, you do have to get a little bit obsessed. But with this model, you don't have to be obsessed with results, which can be counterproductive. You can be obsessed with growth, with progress, with learning, as well as results, which can make your progress a lot smoother, a lot more attainable, and a lot more actually useful towards your overall outcome. So I'll leave you with that. Get obsessed, take action, make sure it's smart action, and you too can achieve mastery in game. Thanks for watching. See you on the next video.